Most people think financial freedom starts somewhere in the millions. They're dead wrong, and the math proves it. The real problem isn't money. I've watched dozens of people destroy their financial lives, not from lack of intelligence, not from lack of opportunity, not even from lack of income. They failed because they misunderstood what money actually is. People treat 100K like it's either meaningless or miraculous, too small to matter, or so large that it should instantly change the entirety of your existence. But neither interpretation is correct. The mathematical reality is a lot more precise. Most people believe freedom requires millions. They assume until they hit some distant number, their financial life is indefinitely on hold. They endure jobs they don't like. They accept stress they wouldn't tolerate elsewhere. They postpone decisions that would give them more control, all because they think that the math hasn't started working in their favor yet. This belief isn't just wrong, it is statistically provable nonsense. What's even worse is that it keeps them trapped in a system designed to extract two unique things from them: their time and their capital and money. Let me be direct here. If you have 100K and you still feel broke, the problem isn't your bank account. You don't need more money. You're running faulty code in your decision making processes. You're using emotion where mathematics should govern instead. You're following cultural programming instead of simple logic. Most crucially, the mistake you're making is you're measuring wealth with the wrong variables. That last point matters a lot more than many people realize at first. When you measure the wrong thing, every downstream decision that you make is also distorted. It isn't just the one decision, it's every decision that follows as an outcome of that. If you optimize for outcomes that don't serve you, if you make trade-offs without understanding what you're giving up, you will end up working hard to build a life that feels far more fragile than it should. I didn't arrive to this viewpoint casually. I spent decades examining my own life and those of people I know well enough to extract patterns from financial markets and the mistakes that they were making in their households. I looked for inefficiencies. I studied price behavior. I analyzed risk-adjusted returns. My initial assumption going into it was that the biggest insights would come from understanding the markets themselves, how people invested, what kind of returns they got. But they didn't. The most profitable insight I ever discovered had nothing to do with stocks or bonds or investments at all. It had everything to do with human behavior, specifically the systematic and predictable errors people make when they interact with money. The story we've been sold about money. The traditional approach to money is fundamentally broken, not partially broken, not just outdated a little bit. It's broken at the structural, fundamental level. The system we live in optimizes for consumption instead of optionality. It is designed to encourage people to maximize visible lifestyle markers rather than invisible resilience. It pushes expenses upward while disguising them as progress, as a life improved and better lived. Even more importantly, it ignores the single equation that determines whether someone is ultimately free or merely well paid but trapped. The capitalist system says higher income equals security, nicer things equals success. If you just earn enough, the rest will work itself out. But if you look at how people actually live close enough, something doesn't quite add up. What you find is you see people earning six figures who are one paycheck away from panic. Families with impressive incomes who feel permanently behind. Highly paid professionals who look successful on paper but operate with almost no flexibility in real life. This is not an accident. It is the predictable outcome of optimizing for the wrong objective. The system trains people to ask the wrong questions, and they get wrong answers as a result. Instead of how much time do I control, we ask ourselves, how much do I earn? Instead of how resilient is my life to disruption, we ask ourselves, what can I afford right now? Instead of what decisions does my money allow me to make now and in the future, we ask, what does this say about me to others? These questions feel normal because everyone around us asks them too of themselves. And that's precisely the problem. Normal is the problem. The 100K threshold. 100K is not just an arbitrary number. It represents a critical threshold, a phase transition point where the mathematics governing your financial life begin to change in meaningful ways. That can only happen if you really understand how the system actually works, and most people don't. They pass through 100K accidentally, briefly, or most not at all. Even when they reach it, they often fail to recognize what they've created. They treat it like a temporary accumulation rather than a permanent structural asset. To understand why this number matters, we need to examine three mechanisms. These mechanisms separate people who use money as a tool for freedom from those who remain enslaved by their own spending patterns. These are not motivational concepts. They aren't mindset shifts. They're mathematical realities. They operate whether you believe them or not. Mechanism 1. Income is not wealth. The very first and most destructive error people make is confusing wealth with income. They are related, but they're not the same thing. I have watched many people misunderstanding this destroy more financial lives and abilities in themselves than recessions, crashes, or market volatility ever could. Let's say somebody earns 200K per year and they live in a high cost of living area. They assume they are wealthy, they earn a lot, they feel successful, they feel secure, and they feel like they've made it. But when you sit down and run the numbers, not emotionally, not aspirationally, but mathematically, a completely different picture emerges. If you calculate their burn rate, you will see the reality for what it is. If you examine their fixed obligations, you analyze how dependent their life is on continuous income. What you frequently discover is near zero optionality. They have built a financial structure that requires constant input to avoid collapse. That's not wealth. That's a high-paying job with expensive golden handcuffs. True wealth isn't about how much money flows through your hands. It is not a cash flow issue. It's about how little effort is required to maintain your lifestyle and your life once the structure is in place. Wealth is resilience. It's flexibility. It's something that gives you choices. Income can coexist with fragility, but wealth cannot. A tale of two financial lives. Let's consider two people. Alex earns 300K per year. He lives in an expensive neighborhood because that's what people like him, the successful people, do. And his environment reflects his income. His peers expect it. Their self-image depends on it. Alex drives a $70,000 luxury car because image matters in his profession. He has a $6,000 monthly mortgage. On its own, that doesn't feel alarming in the least. After all, he earns plenty. But the mortgage is only the beginning. What about property taxes, insurance premiums, maintenance, a second car, private schools, lifestyle maintenance? The little costs that come up with maintaining a certain standard. If you total it all up, their fixed monthly expenses can easily approach $15,000 per month. That's $180K per year just to maintain baseline. So we start with $300K and they pay taxes on it. Afterwards, they might save $40,000 or $50,000 annually, certainly a large sum. But that's only assuming they have a level of discipline most people cannot sustain consistently. Now, consider Bob. Bob earns by comparison $80K per year, significantly less. But he lives in a modest home on the cheaper side of town, where rent is $1,500 a month. That's right, he doesn't live in a home, he lives in a small apartment. He drives a reliable but used car that he purchased with cash that's saved up over months and years beforehand. So he doesn't actually has a monthly payment. His lifestyle is intentionally structured to minimize fixed obligations. He goes out to eat with his friends, but he's not obligated to continue to go out to eat if he doesn't want to. His total fixed monthly expenses approximately $3,000, $3,200 a month. That's $36,000, $37,000 a year. Of course, he also pays taxes on his income, and he keeps roughly 55K a year in spending money. He's also able to save about 2,000 annually. Let's pause for a moment. Who is actually wealthier? Who has more flexibility and more options? Who can withstand disruption better? The person earning nearly 4 times as much, in most cases, is operating from a much weaker position. Their high income gave them permission to build an expensive life structure, and that structure now controls them. They need the job, they need the income, they need the stability from external sources. Just one disruption, whether a job loss, a health issue where they can't work anymore, a market downturn, and the entire system becomes completely unsustainable. Bob has, on the other hand, degrees of freedom. He can take small career risks. If he gets laid off, he can wait for better opportunity to come along. He can absorb shocks without immediate crisis mode. And most importantly, he reaches the 100K threshold years earlier. The silent trap of lifestyle inflation. Nobody warns you about this trap. Every increase in lifestyle creates a new baseline that quickly feels necessary. The human brain is exceptionally good at normalizing improvement. What begins as a luxury rapidly becomes baseline expectation. What once felt indulgent at the beginning soon feels essential. Once you drive a car with heated seats, it's hard to step down. Once you live in a place that has a dishwasher, it is excruciatingly difficult to wash dishes by hand. Not physically difficult, emotionally difficult. Let's say you get a raise. You upgrade your living situation. You adjust your spending just a little bit. And within 6 months, the upgrade no longer feels like an upgrade. It feels like the minimum acceptable standard. This is not a moral failing. It is our neural adaptation. But it is financially catastrophic if you don't deliberately account for it. Each upgrade increases our fixed costs. Each increase in fixed costs reduces our future flexibility. Each reduction in flexibility raises the amount of income we require just to maintain our living baseline. Most people never notice this happening. It is so gradual. And they experience it as progress. Their life is actually getting better. That's a good thing. In reality, it's often regression disguised as success. When money stops behaving linearly. Up to this point, everything that revolves around this basic structure: income versus expenses, lifestyle versus future optionality, fragility versus resilience. Now we need to talk about something most people vaguely understand but rarely experience firsthand: the nonlinear nature of capital and money. This is exactly where 100K stops being just a number in your account and starts behaving like something else entirely. Below this threshold, money operates in one regime. Above it, it operates in another. Confusing these two different regimes is the main reason people stay stuck far longer than they need to. The linear trap most people never escape. When you're just starting out on your saving journey, money behaves linearly. You trade time for dollars, you work more hours, you earn more income. The relationship is direct and intuitive. The more you save, the more you have saved. If you stop working, the money stops coming in. If you work harder or figure out a way to work smarter, you earn more. This model dominates most people's financial lives for decades, which is why it feels so natural and normal. It becomes the default model for how money works. But this model breaks down once capital reaches sufficient critical mass. The problem is that most people never build enough capital and money saved to experience this transition. They mistakenly assume that the system always behaves the same way it does at the beginning. It doesn't. Why 100K is a mathematical inflection point. 100K is not a magical number. It's not symbolic. It's not motivational. It's mathematical. At this level, the money you have saved begins generating returns large enough to start mattering in your day-to-day life. Below it, of course, you still earn returns, but they're mostly psychological. Above it, returns begin to change the decisions that you can make. Let's look briefly at the simple math. If you invest 10K at a conservative 8% annual return, you will generate $800 for the year. That's $67 a month. For the vast majority of people, that amount is just noise. It doesn't alter anything. It doesn't meaningfully reduce dependence on your job income. It doesn't change what decisions you're able to make or how your day to day unfolds. It is technically progress, but it doesn't feel like progress. Now, let's increase the baseline. With 100K, all the same numbers, 8% per year, now you're generating 8,000 per year. That's roughly 667 per month. Now the numbers begin to influence your life a little bit. 600 something a month can cover groceries or a car payment or an insurance premium. It can offset rent or utilities. Even more importantly, it begins to carve out small pockets of time you no longer need to sell just to get the money. This is the moment when money starts decoupling from labor. Not completely just yet, but noticeably. The acceleration most people never live long enough to see. Here's where things become genuinely interesting. Compounding, the way it's taught, doesn't just add returns on top of returns. What actually happens, it compresses time. Let's say you're saving 20K per year. To go from 0 to 100K takes about 5 years. That feels excruciatingly slow. It requires discipline, repetition, and delayed gratifications. Progress is slowly incremental, and any setback feels very expensive. But once you cross 100K, the timeline changes. From 100K to 200K, assuming the same savings rate and modest returns, takes closer to 4 years. From 200 to 300K, roughly 3.5 years. Savings speed up. The curve accelerates. Each increment arrives faster than the last one because the base is generating returns that keep growing. Below 100K, you're just accumulating. Above 100K, you're really starting the compounding trend. These two phases feel similar emotionally because you're still putting your money into your savings, which is why most people confuse them. Mathematically, they're entirely different things. Most people never experience the second regime because they spend the very capital that would have activated it. Why most people never reach critical mass. This part is going to get a bit uncomfortable. Most people don't fail to build wealth because they lack opportunity. They fail because they never allow capital to accumulate just long enough to reach critical mass. For somebody living just around the poverty line, the limitations are real. For somebody whose profession allows for middle income, the limitations are self-imposed. Every raise triggers more consumption. Every bonus triggers a lifestyle expansion. Every milestone reached triggers reward spending. The 20K that could have shortened their timeline instead disappears into a better car, bigger home, or a more expensive version of basically the same life. The compounding engine never has a chance to start up. People hear about compounding constantly. It's one of the most talked about concepts in finance, but very few people experienced it personally. Not because it's rare, but because it requires restraint precisely at the moment restraint feels the least appealing. It is not buying things you finally can afford to buy. What money really buys. Once you reach 100K, something else changes that rarely gets discussed. Your relationship with risk changes. When you're starting from zero, every mistake is catastrophic. Every failed attempt sets you back years. Risk feels existential. A screw up might mean you can no longer have a car. A couple months streak means you're homeless. But once you have a base, risks become strategic. You can deploy smaller amounts, 5,000 or 10,000, into higher upside opportunities without jeopardizing your entire structure. Whether it's a business idea, a skill acquisition like going back to school or earning additional certifications, a concentrated investment that you've actually researched thoroughly. If it works, the upside matters. If it fails, You still have your bases covered. You're not starting over from zero or worse. This is what optionality looks like in practice. Savings allow for choices. Choices create opportunities. And enough opportunities are going to create additional capital. But the system doesn't work until you reach sufficient critical mass. Until then, risk feels like danger instead of leverage. Why time is the only variable that matters? This brings us to the third and most misunderstood mechanism. Most people optimize their day-to-day lives for the wrong variable. They optimize for comfort. They optimize for status. They optimize for convenience. It's short-term pleasure that either locks you in or you have nothing to show for it once it's gone. Those goals aren't immoral, they're simply a little bit misaligned from freedom. It is not an either or, it is which one do you do more of. If your objective is consumption, optimizing for comfort totally makes sense. If your objective is financial freedom, comfort is often the enemy of that. The variable that actually matters the most is time sovereignty, the degree to which your time is under your control, rather than the time owned by the marketplace. Money itself does not buy happiness. The data is clear on that. There is no disagreement with psychologists. Once the basic needs are met, additional consumption produces diminishing emotional returns. Money doesn't reliably buy status either. Status is always relative, it is unstable, and is endlessly unsatisfying. What money buys, reliably and predictably, is your time. Specifically, it buys your time back from the marketplace. Every dollar you have invested and generating returns is a unit of future time you no longer need to sell. When enough of these dollars exist, the transaction changes entirely. You're able to stop selling time for money. That's freedom in mathematical terms. It doesn't mean you do nothing. What it means is you can spend your time doing things you find meaningful to you. The freedom number. Let's make this super practical. I use a simple concept in my own life. It's my freedom number. It is the amount of invested capital required to generate your annual expenses just through conservative returns. If you need 40K per year and can reliably generate 4% real returns, your freedom number is $1 million. If you spend 30K per year, your freedom number drops to 750,000. If you spend 25 per year, it drops even further. Notice what's happening. Reducing expenses lowers the required capital proportionally. The vast majority of financial advice focuses on increasing income. Income is hard. Income depends on the markets, the employers, the skills that are in demand, geography that you live in, timing, and your competition. To raise your income by 20% often requires a promotion, something you can influence but can't directly control. Expenses, on the other hand, are almost entirely under your control. You can have your freedom number without asking permission from anyone. No manager needs to approve it. No markets need to cooperate with that. In fact, you don't even need a promotion. It is immediate leverage entirely in your control. Why expense control beats income growth? I have seen many people chase income increases over decades. They go from 40K to 60K to 80K to 120, a 50% raise, a promotion. Their savings increase from 12,000 to 18,000 per year. That sounds really impressive until you sit down and do the math. They could have achieved the same increase in savings by cutting $10,000 of expenses. That is just a little bit worse a house. That is the difference between a new car and a 3-year-old car. One path required years of career advancement, performance reviews, negotiations, and a hefty bit of luck. The other required analysis and intentional decision making. This asymmetry is almost never acknowledged in financial circles. People default to income growth because it feels aspirational. That's what we are supposed to want. And expense optimization feels restrictive. Who wants to budget anyway? But mathematically, it is often the faster and more reliable path to financial freedom. What actually happens when you reach 100K in savings? This is the moment where many people end up sabotaging themselves. They finally reach 100K, sometimes after years of discipline, and they immediately shift into consumption mode. They start asking themselves dangerous questions. What can I buy now that I can afford it? That question reframes capital as spending money instead of basic infrastructure. It turns a structural achievement into a temporary reward. What's worse, it often resets the entire timeline. 100K is not money to be spent, it's capital equipment. You should see it as a manufacturing plant. Your job isn't to enjoy it. Your job is to protect it and maximize its output. For most people, this means investing it in a diversified, low-cost portfolio designed to generate reliable returns with minimal volatility. There is no secret strategy. You can spend eons looking for inefficiencies in the market, and I can tell you that from individual investors under 1 million net worth, the edge from complexity rarely exceed its costs. Simple, broad, diversified, low cost. That's the mathematically optimal approach at this stage. The one-way door. Once that 100K is invested, something else must change as well. Your psychology. That money is no longer available for spending except in a true dire emergency. It is locked into your freedom system as the foundation. The returns it generates may eventually be used, but the principle is sacred. This is a one-way door. Money goes into the system. It doesn't come back out until the system is fully operational. If you look at people who break this rule repeatedly, let's say they reach 150, 200K saved, and then emergency appears out of nowhere. They will pull out 20K, 50K, but 6 months later, there's another situation that arises that needs the money. So they pull out an additional 15K or 7K or more. And within 2 or 3 years, they're back to maybe 80 or 85K saved, but they lose the entire momentum. Every time you violate the integrity of the system, you end up resetting the clock. You might have good reasons, but the math doesn't care why. Why this feels way harder than it should be. This process feels psychologically excruciatingly difficult, not because it's objectively hard, but because it conflicts with how humans evolved. We evolved in environments where resources were scarce and unpredictable. In that space, immediate consumption made complete sense. Delayed gratification often meant you get nothing. Our neural wiring reflects that history. When we try not to spend the money we already have in the bank, we're fighting millions of years of programming when you choose to save instead to spend. You're fighting millions of years of programming when you choose to save instead of spending. Willpower alone wouldn't win that fight, but systems will. How people actually break through the system and how to make it work for you. At this point, the mathematics should be extremely clear. It's not optimistic, it's not aspirational, it is simple and straightforward. Yet, this is precisely where even mathematically sophisticated people fail. Not because they don't understand the numbers, but because they underestimate the psychological forces working against them. Building to 100K isn't difficult in theory, it is difficult in practice because it takes such a long time. The reason isn't lack of intelligence, access, or even income for many people. It is friction, subtle, constant, and psychological, applied over long periods of time. You're trying not to screw up every single day for years. The 3 categories every dollar falls into. To navigate this friction, you need a simple framework. Every financial decision you make fits into one of the 3 basic categories. There are no exceptions. Category 1, consumption. We need to spend money to live. This is spending that produces no future value. It's entertainment, dining beyond basic nutrition, luxury travel, convenience purchases, and status-driven upgrades. Consumption isn't evil, You're not supposed to live like a monk. It is simply transient. Once the experience ends, the value is gone. Category 2, capital preservation. This is spending that maintains your current operational capacity. These are things you need to spend on to exist. This is housing, basic transportation, healthcare, essential insurance, reliable tools that prevent breakdown. The capital preservation does not increase your future capacity, but it prevents regression. Category 3, capital appreciation. This is spending that increases future capacity for spending. This is like education that improves your income potential, tools that increase your efficiency, or investments that generate returns. This is the only category out of the three that actually compounds. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many people allocate their money roughly like this: 70% consumption, 25% capital preservation, 5% capital appreciation. This is the reality. That allocation produces exactly what you would expect: a life that feels busy and full, a lifestyle that feels expensive, a future that looks very suspiciously similar to your present. People who reach financial freedom invert the structure on its head. Not overnight, not perfectly every time, but intentionally. They drive capital appreciation up to 30 or 40%. They keep capital preservation around 30%. And they reduce their consumption to 30% or even less. This is not about straight deprivation. You have to be strategic. It's about recognizing that every dollar has an opportunity cost. Opportunity cost. The question many people never ask themselves. Opportunity cost isn't what something costs today. This is not a trade. If I do this, I can't do that. It's what you give up tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and the day after that. Forever. This fine distinction changes your entire outlook. Let's consider a simple, brief example. You're deciding whether to spend $5,000 on a luxury vacation or not. You've worked hard, you need a break. That's category 1 spending. It's pure consumption. It produces good memories, pleasure, maybe connection with your kids or partner, and gives you temporary enjoyment. And then it's gone. Alternatively, you can invest that $5,000 into your freedom system. At an 8% return over decades, that $5,000 becomes roughly $73,000 over 30 years. But that number isn't even the most important part. What matters even more is that $5,000, once invested, generates approximately $400 per year every year forever. It's about $33 per month. So the real question isn't, is this vacation worth $5,000? Of course it's worth $5,000. A better question is 1 week of vacation worth $33 per month for the rest of my life? Some people will still choose vacation, and that's perfectly fine. The problem isn't the choice itself. The problem is making the choice without understanding the trade-off that you're making. At the end of the day, why a $5,000 vacation? Why not a $2,500 one? Most people never frame decisions they make this way, which is why their financial lives drift instead of compound. Why willpower is inevitably going to lose. At this stage, many people conclude they simply need more discipline. They don't. Willpower is a finite resource. It depletes with use, which is exactly why it's harder to make good decisions in the evening than it is in the morning. It collapses under stress. This is proven. It fails under cognitive load. Relying on willpower to build wealth is like relying on motivation to exercise every day forever. It works briefly some days, but there are many days when it doesn't. The solution isn't putting more effort. The solution is create a system. The priority allocation model. The most effective system I've seen is super simple. On the day you receive your income, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly or once a month, before it even touches your checking account, a predetermined percentage is automatically transferred into an investment account. You pay your freedom system first. What remains is what you're allowed to spend. This removes your decision point entirely. You don't need discipline anymore. You don't need restraint. You don't need motivation and you don't need willpower. The correct thing that needs to happen just happens magically. Most people do the exact opposite. They receive their income, they spend throughout the month, they try to save whatever is left. Except there's almost never anything left. Your expenses are going to expand to consume all available resources. This is basic Parkinson's law applied to personal finance. If you have it to spend, it will be spent. By shrinking the container, you force expenses to adapt instead. And humans adapt remarkably quickly. Within a few months, the new spending level feels normal and expected. How much should you really save? My recommendation would be starting with at least 20% of your gross pre-tax income. And if you're early, the more the better, up to 30, 40, or 50%. I have seen many people sustain 50% savings rates for years, especially when you're young and you don't have dependents. Not through sheer deprivation and willpower, but through systems they deliberately set up. It sounds extreme until you actually run the math. Cutting your savings timeline in half may mean retiring at 45 instead of 65. That's 20 years you don't need to work a job. 20 years where you control your time entirely instead of selling it to the market. 20 years of no commutes, living wherever you want, and not having to complete monthly reports for your boss. When framed correctly, living on 50 or 60% of income stops feeling like sacrifice, and it starts feeling like a trade-off, which is what it is. The comparison trap. Even with good systems, there's another force constantly working against you. Comparison to your peers. Humans are intensely social creatures. We evaluate our success relative to others. When your peers are driving new cars, taking expensive vacations, and upgrading their lives, and you're driving a 10-year-old vehicle and cooking at home most nights, your brain perceives that as low status. This is not up for debate. The discomfort is powerful. It's real. It creates pressure to conform. This is why peer groups have such a massive impact on financial outcomes. If you surround yourself with people of a certain caliber, you will gravitate to their average. If you surround yourself with people who optimize for consumption, you will drift toward consumption. If you surround yourself with people who optimize for freedom, you'll drift towards freedom. The same principle applies to your informational environment. Social media, advertising you're exposed to, lifestyle content, all of it pushes spending as an identity. You can't outlogic constant exposure. Nobody can. You must deliberately curate your inputs. This isn't about isolation. It's about environmental design. The life is short. This is for the life is short crowd. At this point, someone is inevitably going to raise a valid objection. This sounds way too extreme. When I'm old, I wouldn't be able to enjoy the money. They're sacrificing your youth for a future that might never arrive. This sounds completely reasonable until you examine the data. The happiness research consistently shows that happiness increases with income, but only about $75,000 or $80,000 per year. For most people in most places in the US, that's a middle-class existence. After that, more income means you get to do more things, but your happiness plateaus. Additional consumption produces minimal gains. A day at the beach is still an enjoyable day at the beach, whether you go home at the end of the night or you stay in a 5-star hotel. What continues to increase happiness is autonomy, control over our time, freedom from financial stress, and day-to-day security. Those can only come from capital. They cannot come from more consumption. Once the baseline is met, consuming more doesn't really make you that much happier. Once you no longer experience financial stress, if you can't be happy with what you already have at that point, you will not be happier with more of it. The person spending $100K per year isn't twice as happy as the person spending $50K. Sure, some things are infinitely easier, but the person with $200K invested is dramatically more secure and happier than person with zero. The math here is not controversial. The research is clear on this. It simply conflicts with cultural programming. What freedom actually looks like. Freedom isn't yachts or mansions. It's optionality. It's sleeping better because a job loss is an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. It's being able to walk away from bad situations. It's choosing work based on income and your own interest, not just desperation. It's investing time in health, relationships, and learning that interests you. And it starts much earlier than people realize. Often, just 100K. The timeline question. So, how long does it actually take? Here's the thing, it depends entirely on your savings rate. Save 10K per year, about 8 years. Save 20K, 4.5 years. Save 30K, about 3 years. These are not extreme timelines. They're achievable for anyone with a middle income and reasonable expense discipline. You cannot control market returns with precision. You cannot perfectly control income growth. You can't control your savings rate. You can't control whether you buy a new car or a used one. You choose the house you end up purchasing. That's the lever. And focusing on controllable variables produces immediate psychological benefits. You see progress right away. You end up building momentum and your behavior reinforces itself. Why this works when nothing else does. I have seen people transform their financial lives in 5 years or less, not through luck, not through speculation, and not through inheritance, through systemic application of basic financial principles. Higher saving rate, low fixed expenses, consistent investing, long time horizons, not bi-weekly, not monthly, not annually, in decades. It's not sexy, it's not exciting, it doesn't produce dramatic stories, but it works as near certainty. The real meaning of 100K. Let me leave you with this final thought. 100K isn't the goal. It's just the beginning. It's the point where capital starts generating meaningful returns for normal people, where accumulation becomes compounding, where fragility gives way to resilience. It is a tipping point. You only reach it by making decisions that look irrational to the vast majority of people around you, with driving older cars, living in smaller spaces, skipping purchases that to others feel normal, taking lunch to work from home, and optimizing your major expense categories. These decisions feel like sacrifices while you're making them, but they're not just sacrifice. They are investments in the most literal sense. Investment in a future where you control your time, where taking a month off work doesn't require anybody's permission, where losing a job doesn't redefine your life, where the kind of work that you do becomes a choice rather than an obligation put on you from the outside. This is what 100,000 actually buys. Not the things you can purchase with it, the freedom it generates through compounding. The final question. So here's the real question. Not whether you understand the math, not whether you agree with the logic I'm sharing here, but whether you're willing to make the trade-offs. Most people are not. They'll nod along, they'll agree, and then they'll continue spending at the same rate they have before because it feels normal. Normal is why most people never build wealth. Normal is why most people work until they're 65 or 70 or even older. Normal is why most people have very little control over their time. So now you have a choice. You can optimize for normal, consumption, and comfort today at the cost of freedom tomorrow. Or you can optimize for freedom tomorrow, strategic discomfort today, in exchange for decades of sovereignty later. The math is simple and clear. The path is well defined. The only variable left is your decision. So what are you optimizing for? Because that decision made consciously or unconsciously will determine the trajectory of your entire financial life. Make it deliberately. Make it logically. Make it based on what you actually want your life to look like 10 years from now, not what feels comfortable and good in this moment today. That's how real wealth is built. That's how actual freedom is achieved. This is why 100K isn't just 100K in money. It's the mathematical foundation of a completely different kind of life. Thank you.